Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to the Scrappy Cinema Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Ritchie, and my guest today is Jessica Harrop. She's an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning documentary producer. She's here today in her role as Executive Director at Sandbox Films. Now, Sandbox has been responsible for several science-forward projects through the years, including the Oscar-nominated documentary Fire of Love, and most recently they had two movies screen at this year's Sundance Festival, The Lake and Time and Water. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wanted to have you because I feel like Sandbox fills a very specific niche or void in the independent world, especially the documentary world. So, in your own words, what makes Sandbox special?
The Sandbox Films is special. We're a documentary studio. We provide equity financing and grant opportunities to nonfiction feature films. And all of our films are about the process of doing science in some way. So that's one thing that makes us unique. And we want our films to be about science, but not necessarily feel like your typical science films. So we don't want them to be overly didactic or teaching you things like educational tools, but more just celebrating the beauty of science and the intricacies of the process of doing science. And we want them to play at film festivals and in theaters and cinemas and be, their own art form, as well as being informative about science.
And why is that science focus so important to you?
To me personally, because I love science, I came to this as a science person more than a film person. So I studied science in college and always loved science, thought I might be a scientist. I've always been in the science communication field. And Sandbox Films specifically has a science mandate because we are a subsidiary of the Simons Foundation, which is a family foundation based here in New York. And they contribute a lot to math and science research. That's their mandate. So we're part of their outreach programs here. Yeah.
And I'm curious, you mentioned that the science, it's almost more embedded in the story, right? It's not hitting you over the head with the science. So I'm curious when you hear a pitch or you're thinking of an idea at Sandbox, how do you balance or kind of get that feeling that the science will be there and the story will be there that can pull that science through and get it in front of a new audience?
So we define science as the art of asking questions. So what we're looking for is what are the questions that the filmmaker is asking? Because science is that iterative process. You have a question about the world and you try to answer it, and that answer just leads to another question. So if we get, and then I think on top of that, that's helpful with story because in a narrative, you're always, learning something new that reveals something else that takes you on a journey. And so I think for us, it's about, finding those films that really take you on an interesting journey and ask questions, not necessarily answer the questions. And that's kind of what science means to us. So, for example, we have a film called Confessions of a Good Samaritan by Penny Lane, and it's about Penny's donating her kidney to a stranger. And the reason that it was such an interesting film for us is that she's asking this question, what makes us a good neighbor? Why are some people more altruistic than others? What do we owe each other? Why does she feel this need to give her kidney when not everybody does? And on that journey, she's interfacing with some scientists, but also just different people. And that is what's those films that really just ask those really interesting questions are what we're excited about.
So take me through sort of the life of a project at Sandbox. Are you looking for projects that are completed to acquire? Are you looking to fund pre-production? Where do you fit into this whole system?
So we do a lot of development deals. So we'll give a smaller amount of money to an idea, to a film team that just wants to explore something. And then they will basically come up with materials to prove that that idea would be a good feature film. So maybe a visual sample, a deck, a budget, some access, some research, find an archive, that kind of thing. So I think a lot of our deals are development deals, and then we'll have a first right of negotiation to put it into production should we all like working together and the idea be a good one. And then we also come in with production financing. So larger amounts of money for films that have had some development already. We don't do as many finishing funds. We don't acquire films that are finished. We like to come in earlier. We also have a couple grant programs. So we have a long running partnership with Sundance. We give grants through Sundance to projects about science at any stage. And then we have a Sandbox Science Pitch Award at CPH Docs at their forum. And we have Sandbox prizes at AFO Camp for Science. AFO is the longest running science film festival in the world. And they have a development program for film, a week-long program for films in development. And we help mentor that program and then give grants at the end of the program to some of the projects. And then we have Camp Sandbox, which is a retreat that we run where we bring 15 filmmakers and 15 scientists together for a long weekend, and everybody has 10 minutes to tell the group about either their science research or how they think about narrative and how they tell stories. And, film ideas are often born from that retreat.
And I wanted to go back to that idea of funding at sort of the idea stage, because when you hear a pitch for a documentary, I suspect there's a lot more room for the story to change or evolve versus a narrative pitch. So how do you sort of account for, I guess we'll see where this goes whenever supporting a project?
I mean, that's the sort of the beauty of it. I think that's exciting is you don't know where it's going to go. Yeah, I mean, often, Fire of Love, which you mentioned, was one that we funded the development of. And that was, I've heard that this, the filmmakers were saying, we've heard this archive exists. We've seen snippets of it. We want to know what's actually in it and if it would be a good film. And so that development was, here's a little bit of money to get that archive, digitized so you can actually watch it and see if the film is in there. So often it's like very concrete things, like a very concrete ask, or I want to see if I can get access to this person and film them and see what it's like, what they're like on camera. And it's those little things that might not cost as much money as putting a film into production, but there can be a big upside if the footage is amazing or the access is amazing. So for us, taking risk on these ideas, just to see if there's anything really exciting there is something we like to do.
And do you support strictly feature length or do you support shorts as well?
We mostly do features. We've had shorts series that we did in partnership with the New York Times Op Docs. And that was sort of a special project. We worked with filmmakers from around the world who were inspired by elements of the periodic table, and they each made a short film about that element. But typically, yeah, we do features.
One of the things we're always talking about here is the challenge of distribution around short films, and how do you make that work economically and realistically for everyone involved. And speaking of challenges, there are some in the industry, I'm told. What are some of the specific challenges you see around distribution for science-centric films?
I think we face similar challenges, science-centric versus other docs. I mean, often our films are in the same boat as the other films that are premiering at Sundance or South by or any of these festivals. And I think, there's just not as many distribution pathways, traditional distribution pathways, as there used to be. There's just not as many buyers. And it seems like the buyers are buying less. And so it's not guaranteed anymore that if you premiere your film at Sundance, you'll have a big deal. And that has become a challenge to figure out. For us, we're philanthropically backed. It's really important to us more than anything that our films get seen. And so figuring out how to put the right teams together, to get the films out there, to build our own audiences. It's a daunting thing, but we're starting to distribute things in-house and put our own scrappy teams together um, to try to solve the problem. But it's more challenging now. I mean, I think you have to start thinking about distribution when you're in production. You have to start thinking about, well, who is the audience? Where are they? How can we reach them? How are we going to do that? How are we going to fund that earlier on?
Are we past peak true crime doc yet?
I don't know. I think that true crime has had a moment for a really long time. So probably not past that being a sellable thing.
So you started Sandbox. You were starting Sandbox in 2020, correct?
Yeah, I was starting working on the idea of it in 2019, and then we officially launched in 2020.
So it hasn't been that long, but have you seen any trends one way or the other in terms of people sort of maybe being more open to science forward projects?
Yeah, I mean, one great example is when we first started our Sundance Fund. The first couple cycles of that fund, 7, 8 years ago, we were getting very few projects submitted to that fund. And Sundance in general was saying we really don't get that many science docs submitting to Sundance at all, whether let alone the fact that there's a science fund now. And so often, the dockets we would get from them with all of the projects, most of those projects were projects that I had found and told to apply and very sort of boots on the ground. Now we're getting over 300 projects apply to each round, and there's two per year. So it's just, we're seeing so many more science projects applying to our programs. And whether that's, the people are now knowing who we are and hearing about our programs, but I think also having those opportunities available and people seeing more science films, having, be premiering at places like Sundance, hopefully that's inspiring people to want to tell science stories.
And maybe this is self-evident, but has funding become more of a challenge for documentarians in the last 2, 3 years?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there was a big boom where where docs were selling for a lot of money, and I think a lot of investors came into the field, and there was more investor money to go around, and a lot of those companies have shut down in the last couple of years. The three companies that we were using as roadmaps for Sandbox. These are companies that we think we could be like one day, all have no longer exist now. So, I do think that a lot of funders are leaving the game, and it's harder.
Well, that's a downer. So let's well,
Yeah.
where do you see, Sandbox 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and where do you hope we are in terms of acceptance and viewing of these films? I think it's a genre of film that I personally always enjoy and gravitate towards, and the movies often feel like they should be able to have a wider audience if we could just get them there. So what do you see, or what would you hope to see in terms of both Sandbox and larger the embrace of science focused documentaries or science backed documentaries over the next few years?
We hope to keep going and keep pounding the pavement. I think we are thinking more and more about how we can do more of our own distribution to really get our films out there in ways that we want to. So I think that's a place that will grow as a company. And yeah, this year, 2026 is a big, big year for us. Typically we've had, 1 to 4 films coming out a year. And this year, we have, I think, 6 films having their world premiere in these first 4 months of the year. And we've got had 2 at Sundance. We have 1 at True False, 1 at South by, 1 at Big Sky. We have some coming up later in the year having their world premieres. We're opening Andre's an Idiot in theaters next week. which was our Sundance film last year. So we've got another couple films that will do theatrical releases this year. So to me, this is a big data collection year. It's let's see how all of these films do. Let's see how we can get them out. Let's see how these theatrical runs go. And then let's position ourselves based on that data to keep finding the audiences that love these projects and getting the films to them. And we've got 20 films on our slate right now in production and development. So we're going. We're excited to keep bringing these science docs to the world. Yeah.
Well, you say 20 films in production, but you're a very lean company, right?
We are, yeah. I mean, we all wear a lot of hats on the team, and everyone does a lot of work. And each of the films has its own robust film team that's making the film. So we're really advisors, EPs, yeah, creative consultants, distribution consultants, these kinds of things to our projects.
So today, you're Jessica Harrop, Executive Director, Sandbox Films. But for those who are watching who maybe are a little earlier in their career, tell us a little bit about your path to starting Sandbox.
Yeah, so I started out as an associate producer in science television. I was a freelancer. I worked on different episodes of PBS Nova and on shows for Discovery Channel and National Geographic. And I just worked my way up through the freelance TV world for over 10 years. And it was a lot of networking and sort of convincing people that I could do it. And I think that the thing that really helped me was I had this science undergraduate degree. And so I sort of sold myself as I'm a associate producer and then showrunner eventually that can understand science, talk to science, read science papers, get my hands dirty with, learning all of the things that need to get learned for whatever the series was. And people really liked having somebody on staff who could have those skills. And so having sort of my own little niche was a really helpful thing in finding work. And then I think that also helped, eventually the Simons Foundation find me because I'd been doing all this science work in science communication. And so when they wanted to expand, how they were supporting film, they reached out to me and that's how I sort of started here. And then Sandbox Films was born from that. So yeah, it was a lot of networking and and sort of figuring out what my specific role was in the industry.
And when we hear science, we often think, very serious things. But let's not forget about your stint as a whiteboard artist on the MIT chemistry YouTube page.
Yeah, my minor in college was in theater and acting. And so there was a time when I thought I was going to be an on-camera talent. And so I've done a couple funny on-camera things. I did not really like being the talent in the end, but.
And lastly, if someone, has an idea to pitch or someone wants to pitch something to Sandbox, what's sort of the quality you're looking for that is really going to get to a green light? What's something that is sort of that thing that you need to see in that pitch?
So we like to be surprised. We like to see style and form that's new and different and interesting. We like to see interesting access, interesting story, often just things we don't know a lot about or that we want to keep learning about are the things that we like. Yeah, previous work, we look at that too. I think often it's you can have a checklist of all the things, but at the end of the day too, there's this like special sauce of like, who are we as humans? Like what just like, feels like a thing that I would be a good support for, something that I'm interested in could maybe be a helpful executive on too, which I think people don't always talk about. It's like, sometimes it's just like, this is a project that like, I feel connected to and I feel like I could help. So, yeah.
especially in the documentary world, right? It's so important to have that personal connection and curiosity at whatever
Yeah.
level you're involved in it, whether you're the filmmaker or producer or wherever you are in that chain. So,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing what Sandbox has next.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was really fun to meet you and chat.
My guest today, once again, has been Jessica Harrop, the Executive Director of Sandbox Films. You can find out more about Sandbox's upcoming releases and projects by visiting them at sandboxfilms.org. Until next time, I'm Ryan Ritchie. Stay scrappy, everybody.